morning, and welcome to another episode of Disability Matters. I'm Morgan Spicer, Self-Advocate Coordinator with People First of West Virginia. Disability Matters is designed to cover a wide range of topics that will inform you, inspire you, and encourage you to strengthen your advocacy journey. Now, we'll do this by offering a variety of guests as well as interviews with advocates around the state. It's not just legislative advocacy, it's so much more. So this month, we had the chance to speak to Cortland Nesley, TBI Program Manager for the West Virginia University Center for Excellence in Disabilities. Let's get to that interview now. All right. Today, I'm talking to Cortland Nesley from the West Virginia University CED. Thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Nice to have you. So first, could you describe some of the key services, like what is WVU CED and some of the services that you offer?
Sure, absolutely. So the CED, or the Centers for Excellence in Disabilities, it is a federally designated entity, right? Every state has one, and it runs through a university, and they serve as a sort of hub, right, for different pieces of disability, advocacy and services. And each USED, or Center for Excellence in Disability, right, they're going to look different from state to state. For our purposes, we're really focused on a combination of some direct client services, research related to disability, so we can keep building that knowledge base, and a lot of training as well. So that way, information about disability, can get in the hands of various providers throughout the state. So the way it works is there are a lot of different specific programs that are nested within the Center for Excellence in Disabilities. So for example, there is a assistive technology program, there is a behavior support program, or in my case, I manage the state's traumatic brain injury services program. So we specifically are a free program, for anybody in the state who's had a traumatic brain injury. And we help coordinate services for them, right? We'll do a sort of person-centered planning with them to try to figure out what their needs are post-injury and how to get them connected to other resources throughout the state. It's kind of a bridge builder in some sense.
Perfect. And yeah, I think that's great because traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of death among individuals with disabilities. So I think for them to have that support and knowing that someone's got their back is such a great thing.
Yeah, I think it's really critical too. It's funny. Sometimes I think, sometimes we create these natural separations between like TBIs over there and something like IDD, or intellectual disability is like over there in the other corner. And there's a lot of overlap between those two things for sure, and I think it's really important to know that, recovery from a traumatic brain injury, both, clinically, but also, socially in terms of social services, that's something that, a lot of people might need to, utilize through their, lifespan for sure.
Yes, absolutely. So how does the West Virginia University CED empower individuals with disabilities and their families to advocate for themselves?
Sure, I think there's a couple of things that our center does that can be able to help folks out. I think first and foremost is we can arm people with information, right? If you're trying to be an advocate for yourself, whether that's on a small scale, right? If in one-on-one interactions with providers, or on a big scale, right? If we're talking about like legislative efforts, things like that, it's really important that, like how do we marry, because they're already coming in, advocates are already coming in with their stories, right? Which is really such a critical piece of advocacy, right? That they're grounding their advocacy in their lived experience. And I think the thing that we can do is help. How do we help, hone that and then marry it with like larger information, right? We hold a lot of data regarding, disability in the state, as well as a lot of, expertise and subject matter expertise here in the center. And so, something we do like to do is, again, it's that bridge builder piece, right? How do we bring self-advocates together, connect them with other stakeholders and entities throughout the state whose interests align with those self-advocates, and then marry those two things together, right? Marrying that lived experience piece with the data piece, with the larger literature piece, and bring all of that together to create one cohesive sort of voice that can help, with a wide variety of things regarding disability, whether that's legislative or even something as simple as like, hey, my doctor doesn't understand brain injury. Can you give me some information to be able to like get him to listen or her to listen to what I'm trying to tell them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a skill that's important for all advocates, is to be able to network in the community and find their support systems.
Yeah.
And as if they find those, they've got reliable people that's going to help them and it's going to arm them with information and support.
Totally. And I think it's mutually beneficial too, because, when we interact with, self-advocates, we learn the things we don't know that we don't know, and vice versa, hopefully. I think that information sharing piece, that story sharing piece gives us all a more comprehensive idea of what's going on in the state when it comes to traumatic brain injury. And the reason I bring in that provider piece is, uh, one of the things we do, for example, right, is we do a needs assessment for folks with traumatic brain injuries to the state. So we survey and we talk and interview like a lot of different folks with, traumatic brain injuries through the state to try to get a sense of what their needs are, right? Because they're going to know better than us, right? We don't necessarily know what their needs are. We have an idea, from working with them, but we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to like really reflect, what the lived experience, needs are. And the number one, listed thing in terms of what they perceive the barriers to service to be is that a lot of providers just do not know enough about traumatic brain injury. And so, that lets us have a more comprehensive plan of going like, okay, that means we have some trainings to do, right? That means we have some more, products to create that are going to be able to give self-advocates what they need to talk to their provider and educate their providers about brain injury. But that doesn't happen unless we have that conversation with the community first, right? And I think that's the real key is that, you keep playing that community builder, you keep playing that bridge builder. That's what I think is really the critical piece of it.
Yeah, and being armed with knowledge. I mean, that is
Hmm.
such a great thing, especially, for example, our advocates attend what's called Disability Advocacy Day
Yeah.
at the Capitol. So our group local here, we did what's called vision boards.
Mm.
And so we took those vision boards to our lawmakers so they could see what we're fighting for and the information that we have, to arm them with information because not everybody knows. So, you give that information out, it's going to give people more of a chance to network.
Yeah, big time for sure.
So, can you name a time when the services you offered made a difference in someone's life?
Sure, absolutely. One of the favorite examples that I like to give. So we, the Traumatic Brain Injury Services Program, have a partnership with a place called Recovery Point, and they run a series of recovery-based programming down in the southern part of the state. They're located, Bluefield, I think, Parkersburg, Charleston, and Huntington, I think, is their 4 locations. And for the past about year and a half here, they've agreed to incorporate TBI screenings as a part of their intake process, right? Because that's one of the things we're interested in as well. We're a lot of folks who have brain injuries do not know they have brain injuries, right? They hit their head, 15 years ago, never went to see a doctor, and they don't think about it again. But it can have real tangible effects. And so that screening piece is really critical, especially in vulnerable populations like those in recovery. What they have found is that we're about over 1,000 screens in, and they're screening positive at about a 60% rate. Now, a screen is not a diagnosis by any means, but it's definitely an indication that it's really prevalent in this particular population. So the key then is like, how do you connect that to tangible service, to tangible like next action steps and outcomes. In this instance, for example, like there are some folks I'm thinking of where they come into recovery, they get that screening, they go, hey, you might have a brain injury. They eventually get that diagnosis, and then we're able to serve them. And from there, we're able to do that needs assessment. We're able to go in and go like, what do you need, especially coming out of recovery? Like, what are the services that you're going to need coming out of that? And one of the things, for example, is there's a program in the state called Funds for You, right? So Funds for You, it's funded by the Bureau of Behavioral Health. And it is a pay of last resort funding program for specifically for those with traumatic brain injuries and spinal cord injuries. And the idea behind it from a design perspective is, we have resource coordinators, but if they cannot find an existing resource in the state that addresses one of the needs of our clients, then they're able to leverage, a certain amount of dollars from that funds for you in order to attain it. What's very helpful for that program for these folks coming out of recovery is it can help pay for a lot of those upfront costs in regards to like getting shelter and first and last month's rent, right? And getting them on their feet because there are other resources that can exist that can sustain them once they're settled, but it's getting to that point of getting them settled that is often a challenge, and it can be very difficult, especially if you have more complex access needs. Navigating some of those channels can be particularly difficult. When you're dealing with TBI, you have access needs around memory and executive function and organization and et cetera. And these social services can be fairly overwhelming. And so that's the thing I'm really proud of is connecting the big picture partnership building, systematic, like system stuff, then all the way bound to direct client service, right? Like, how do you go from screening to connection to our program to needs assessment to leveraging that funding resource, right? Like that kind of continuum is what we're really, I think, aiming for. And that's the thing I think a good example of how it should work in the ideal world for sure.
And the services that you mentioned, those are available for like individuals with disabilities as well, right?
Yeah, so different. There are a lot of different programs within the CED, and for anybody who's interested in more sort of detailed information, I would give a sort of blow by blow, but we'd be here for like 2 hours. There's a lot of programs. I would recommend going to just Google West Virginia Center for Excellence in Disabilities, and there's like a big list of different programs, and different people are going to be eligible for different things. For our program, for example, you need to have a medically documented traumatic brain injury. If you have that, free program, we can serve you. But there's other programs that have more general, eligibility, right? There's disability employment services, for example, we do here. So we have folks and we help them out in terms of, getting connected to different employment options. There's family to families, which are sort of connecting parents of those who have kids with, complex access needs or disabilities more generally, in terms of finding support with each other. Again, assistive technology services, getting people connected to those assistive technology pieces. So there's a pretty, wide array there's a feeding and salt. There's a lot of clinics here as well. This is all to say, like, if you are adjacent to disability, if you are, if that's your lived experience, or if you're a caregiver, or even if you're a provider who works, in disability, I think the Center for Excellence in Disability is something you should look into, because it covers a pretty wide array of grounds. And the useful thing about us all, being under one building, like literally, I mean, we have a couple different locations and we have remote workers throughout the state, but because we're centralized, it allows us to collaborate and talk with each other a lot more easily too, right? So oftentimes, for example, if you go on our website and you click like the get services, there's like a little get services button, right? And you fill it out, that'll come to us. And every Monday morning we have a little triaging meeting, right? Where we go like, okay, this is what this person's needs are. This is what they're requesting. We think this program, and this program should go into a meeting with this person, right? We're able to sort of like, on the back end, try to play this matchmaker and figure out how that works. And so to answer, I guess it's a long-winded way of answering your question, of which is like, yes, even if traumatic brain injury isn't your particular lived experience, if disability, in any sort of context is more sort of, what you're looking for, I'd still recommend looking into CED programming because there's probably something that we can help you out with.
Excellent. And it's nice because that's one of the purposes of my show as well, is to show people, individuals in the state, that these services are available, that
Oh yeah.
help is out there,
Mhm.
because sometimes you're navigating in a sea of, well, I'm not so sure where to go next.
Sure.
So
Oh
it's
yeah.
good that there's like organizations like yours, the
Mhm.
CED, the ARC, places like
Yeah,
that help and network, because then we can just help that individual when the time comes if they need it.
absolutely. And, hopefully those individuals, you know, again, we're open to collaboration as well, right? Is a big piece as well, right? If you're somebody who has passions around a particular topic around disability, please feel free to reach out in that way too, whether it's like help you need, awesome, we can help with that. And if it's just like, hey, I see a gap, right? Or I see a thing that is something that kind of falls in our purview, right? Again, we're also interested in these bigger systems questions. So, don't be, if you're like, I want to be, you know, not even just a self-advocate, but like a self-advocate in a bigger way, please feel free to reach out in that regard too, because, hopefully, we can sort of pool our knowledge bases together and, do some lovely work.
Excellent. So if advocates wanted to contact you guys,
Hmm.
what's the best way to get a hold of you guys if they want to call or talk to you about wanting more information?
Sure, absolutely. There's a few different ways you can do that. So, like I said, a very simple way is if you just go on our website, that would be just CEDWVU, all one word, all lowercase .org. You can find our website or just Google us. Either way is perfectly fine. And then there's, buttons you can push that are like, get connected, get services. That's one way. If that's not your speed, you can also give us a call. So you can give us a call at 304 293 4692. I'll say it again. That's 304 293 4692. And obviously, for those who, because not everybody is, the computer or the technology piece isn't their thing. We want to make sure we're getting in touch with people, in any medium that they feel comfortable with, for sure. And if email is preferable, you can reach out at cedcontact at hsc.wvu.edu. That is HSC is Health Science Center because we were nested within the university. So I'll give that again. That's cedcontact at hsc.wvu.edu. Any of these, communication methods, whatever works for you, we'll, get in touch.
Excellent. So the traumatic you mentioned earlier that you have traumatic brain injury public meetings.
Hmm.
So do you want to talk about that and see
Absolutely.
just how people can get involved, what they need to do?
Sure, absolutely. So annually, our program has what we call public meetings, and the design of those public meetings is to speak to our needs assessment specifically. So again, we run an ongoing needs assessment that gauges, what are the common barriers, gaps in services, or even what's going right, not just what's going wrong, in the world of TBI, both from the perspective of with the three different surveys, those with lived experience of a TBI, family members and caregivers of those with TBI, and providers who work with those with TBI. This is a tremendously helpful assessment for our purposes because what it does is it really helps guide us as a program to figure out like, what are the needs and then how do we orient our programming around that, right? So for example, what we are finding in a lot of our needs assessment data is, there's a pretty major gap in cognitive-based services, for example, right? So a lot of folks are getting their standard, like they're getting their physical therapy, they're getting their occupational therapy, and they're getting in speech, in language pathology therapy. Are they getting enough of it? That's another question for sure, but they're getting it. But when you look at like cognition-based rehab, it's nearly non-existent in the state here, or at least accessing it is incredibly difficult. So that gives us a direction, right? That gives us go like, okay, that means we have to work to figure out like how can we figure out how to bring that to the state in a more accessible way? How can we supplement it, right? Like if it doesn't exist, what is a good proxy, But all that can only happen if two things occur. One, people take the survey, right? Because it's very useful. We take that feedback very seriously. So again, that's on our website. So feel free if you are interested to go on that website and if you want your voice heard, let that be known. But also the reason why we talk about this needs assessment publicly is because we want your feedback in real time as well, right? So it lets us present on what we are finding, right, in that data, and then directly hear like, okay, what's missing? What other questions do you want us to ask, right? What feels missing to you, right? That helps us keep refining that needs assessment. Our needs assessment runs on sort of 3-year cycles. This is year 2 of 3. And so we're going to collect data for 3 years, and then we're going to refine it, right? We're going to sort of tool the assessment. And that retooling is only as good as we're getting feedback to the people who it's relevant to. So even just for an example, in our last cycle of needs assessment, someone brought up a very salient point of like, hey, you're measuring how are people getting TBIs, but we're lumping, for example, motor vehicle accidents, but I would really like to know, you know, car accidents versus motorcycle accidents versus ATV accidents, because they're all very different things. And we thought that was, yeah, that's probably something we can suss out. So in this particular iteration, the needs assessment, we were like, okay, we're going to ask a broader range of mechanisms for how people got their TBI. And it's that kind of feedback. That's just an example, but we love that kind of feedback because it helps us make sure that we're getting information that is relevant to the people who it's going to impact, right? And so let me go ahead and pull up when those are happening. Those public meetings are happening at the end of the month, but I want to make sure I'm getting the dates right. So let me, instead of guessing, I'm going to refer to our website here. So one moment.
Absolutely.
Let's see. TBI, because the first one, there are three of them. One is going to be in Morgantown, one is going to be in Charleston, and then there's a virtual one. So that way, if you cannot, travel or attend, there's a way to do it virtually as well. So we're going to go ahead. Boop, 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 boop. Here we go. Okay, so the first one is going to be Thursday, June 26th, is here in Morgantown at the Center for Excellence in Disabilities, which is at 959 Hartman Run Road. And that's happening from 10:30 a.m. to noon. And again, all this information is on our website. The virtual one is that Friday, June 27th. That is from noon to 1:30 p.m. Registration is required for that, just that we have a good idea of attendance and things like that. So again, feel free to jump on our website to register for that meeting. And then the last one will be in Charleston, and that is on Monday, June 30th at our CED South offices, and that is in the Equities House. And that is from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And again, we would really appreciate folks coming. It's something we take very seriously, the feedback that comes from this. And so, bringing in folks and their lovely, perspectives and thoughts and inquiries and questions is something we really, really would love.
Perfect. And all that information is available on your, I believe you guys have a Facebook page as well, correct?
Yes, that's right. And we've posted about that as well. So if the website is, difficult to navigate or find, always feel free to look us up on Facebook and we'll have updates about that there as well.
Perfect. And, we love sharing information. So we usually always share any new things that are coming up with the CED or anything like that. That way our advocates know. And I think this is a great opportunity for them to come and get involved and to make their voice heard.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you again for, having us on the show too, because, again, the more people we can have involved in this, the better. So, we really appreciate it.
Hey, it's not a problem at all. I'm glad that Doug actually recommended me. I recommended you because I was like, sometimes I have incidents where
Sure.
I am like, who am I going to have for the show? So
Sure.
just, having, backup like that, just, Doug has a lot of connections. So it's good that he's helped. He's a very big help.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
All right. So is there anything else that you might have missed that you want to add?
I guess if there's anything else, just because I mentioned this, I think slightly before, one thing that I think we're trying to do as a program and that I'm just interested in generally is, I think historically, again, I think there's been this like disconnect between the TBI world and the larger disability community or the IDD world specifically, et cetera. Sometimes it's like, this pie's over there and that pie's over there, but really so many of the needs are similar. So many of, I think, the advocacy that's being done in both corners is similar. And so, I've just been really yearning, I think, to continue to push for, these communities talking with each other, really seeing what each other needs, because I think we're going to find a lot of shared interests and a lot of shared fights going on. And so that's something I'm interested in as well. So even if TBI is not, your particular lived experience or not particular, I would still maybe gently offer that, like, I think there could be tremendous benefit in sort of like talking to each other and seeing how we can help each other out in advocacy.
The whole strength in numbers complex.
Oh,
I say
yeah.
that a lot. I feel like that's one big thing that I love about People First is that aspect,
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
All right. Thank you so much, Cortland, for joining us this month. If you want more information on what West Virginia Center for Excellence in Disabilities do, We encourage you to visit www.cedwvu.org or call 304-293-4692. You could also visit them on the Facebook page by searching for West Virginia Center for Excellence in Disabilities to see what they're up to. We also encourage you, if you're in the area, to attend the TBI public meetings coming up on June 26th in Morgantown, June 30th in Huntington, and on June 26th virtually on Zoom. And you can visit cedwvu.org for all that information. Don't forget, if you want to be featured on an episode of Disability Matters or have a subject you would like to be discussed on a future episode, please reach out to me. You can call 304-422-3151 extension 129, or you can email me at morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org. I would love to have you on a future episode. With that, we are out of time for this month. Join us next time for another episode of Disability Matters. We are advocating, educating, and celebrating the potential within you. See you next time.